Welcome to the port scanning lab. Now, port scanning is an activity that is performed both by the defensive side, that is cybersecurity professionals, as well as the offensive side, the hackers. Now, this activity allows you to discover ports which are open on your system, and it also allows the cybersecurity professionals to consequently block services which are no longer required in order to harden the security. Nothing beats security more than a vulnerable port open on your system. We are going to conduct our lab using the Nmap tool. It is a simple yet powerful tool which allows port scanning in a wide range of scenarios. Now, port scanners are an important tool in any pen tester's armor, and it helps identify open ports as well as the services running on those ports. So for example, if the port 23 is open and the telnet service is running, so the port scanner is going to inform the pen tester that both the port is open and the service is running. Here is a list of some common services and their ports. So FTP runs on port 21, SSH, the secure shell, always uses port 22. Telnet, which is a very weak protocol and transmits data in plain text, transmits on port 23. SMTP runs port 25. The domain name system runs on port 53. HTTP, the protocol used for web browsing, and an insecure protocol because it transmits data in plain text, runs on port 80. The secure version, that is HTTPS, runs on port 443, and SQL runs on port 1433, and so on. So all of these are standardized ports. Now we have multiple types of port scans, but generally speaking, we either employ TCP or UDP port scans, or we also employ stealth scans. So the basic difference between these scans and stealth scans is that stealth scans try to launch scans which are not easily detectable. Because for example, if you do a lot of port scanning, so basically you're obviously sending messages and receiving messages, right? You're probing different ports. So any of the security tools at the destination server, it can trigger an alert on those tools and you could be discovered or blocked. So let's have a look at some of the commands used for port scanning. First of all, we'll see how we can scan 1000 common TCP ports. So the command used is Nmap, and then either you can specify the range of IP addresses using the mask. So for example, this says that 192.168.1.1 and then the mask 24. So all of this range of IP addresses would be scanned, or alternately, you can specify a single IP address, in which case the 1000 ports would be scanned for this system only, whereas in this case, the common 1000 ports would be scanned for this range of IP addresses. Let's have a look at the results. So we have launched Nmap scan on a single IP address, and here are the results. So basically 3 ports are open. One is for HTTP, one is for IPP, another one for MySQL. So all are TCP ports because we have launched a TCP scan. And we also see the port numbers here. And we also see that there are 997 closed ports. So not only we found out open ports, we also found out which services are running on those ports. So next is how to scan all the ports on a destination IP or a range of IP addresses. And it's really simple. We just use a special flag which says that scan all the ports. So as the results show, we find 3 ports open as previously, but this also shows the remaining ports which are closed, which is 65532. So basically this scan basically probes all the ports on a destination and informs us about all the open ports as well as the closed ports. So sometimes we are just interested in scanning a single port, in which case we simply specify the flag -p and then we specify the port followed by the IP address which we want to scan. Now why would we want to scan a single port? The answer is actually quite simple. Sometimes attackers, they don't want to leave a big footprint. If they're scanning a lot of ports, this leaves a footprint and it can trigger alert by the intrusion detection systems or the firewalls at the destination. So basically, in order to hide their tracks, in order to operate in a stealth mode, sometimes they just probe ports which are known to host weak services. For example, port 80. HTTP now transmits data in plain text. So if you just want to see whether the web server supports HTTP or not, you can simply scan port 80. Similarly, you can also scan port 23 to see if the vulnerable service telnet is working or not at the destination. So the results for this scan just simply reveal whether port 80 is open or not. So next is fingerprinting the operating system. It is very important for the attacker to find out what he is up against. So a lot of information can be gathered, and he can, customize his attack if he knows the exact operating system which is running on the destination server. So for this, Nmap can again be used using the flag -O. So for the output, we see which operating system is running. In this instance, we see that it's a Linux kernel running on the destination. Now this gives a lot of firepower to the attacker, because once he knows the exact operating system and the version, he can do some research offline and find out vulnerabilities or known weaknesses of that operating system and then target the attack. So next is discovering IP addresses. Sometimes the attacker is just interested in find out the identities or the IP addresses of all the systems within a subnet. So for this purpose, a ping scan or a ping sweep could be done. So this is done by specifying the flag -S_P, which tells Nmap to launch a ping scan or a ping sweep for a range of IP addresses, which in this case is 10.0.2.0/24. So as the results show, we are going to find out all of the IP addresses which are up. So for example, we see that 10.0.2.2 is up, 10.0.2.3 is up, and so on. So this basically tells us all of the IP addresses which are available. So basically, since we used a mask of 24, therefore Nmap is going to scan 256 different IP addresses or different hosts, and it's going to tell you how many of those hosts are up. So now we are going to move to the virtual machine and do a practical demo. After that, some tasks would be assigned to you to complete on your own. So for the demo, please head over to Kali Linux and let's go to the full screen mode. Directly just start the terminal. So if you need help about any of the Nmap command, you can do nmap --help, and it's going to show you all the different commands that are available and the different flags. For example, for OS detection, it's -O. Let me clear the screen. Now let's start. So the first interesting thing that we want to do is that we want to do a Nmap port scan for the 1000 most common ports. So for that you can do Nmap, and then you have to identify the destination, which in this case is localhost. Now normally this would be the victim server, but since we are doing it locally on our current machine, the current Linux machine, so let's do that. Now it has scanned the first 1000 common ports, and it has identified that 997 of those are closed. However, 3 ports are open. So the first one is SSH port 22, second is HTTP port 80, and then MySQL on port 3306. So please bear in mind this is a scan of the 1000 most well-known ports. So it's not going to scan all 65,000 ports. And also, depending on which labs you've run first or previously, you may see slightly different results here. Now, the next thing is that attackers, they often want to operate in a stealth mode, because when you're scanning these 1000 ports, this is definitely going to leave some sort of logs in security tooling. So sometimes the attackers, they don't want to have a large footprint. They want to minimize their footprint. So they can specifically target a particular port. So for that, you can do nmap, then -p for that specific port, and then the destination. So in this case, we scanned for specifically port 80, and which is open, that we already know. Let me clear the screen. So besides this, you can also scan for a range of ports. So for example, you can do nmap and then -p to scan port 80 to port 100, and then the destination, which is localhost. So in this case, Nmap has scanned starting from port 80 all the way up to port 100. All of these are closed except for port 80. Now let's do something more interesting. Nmap is a very powerful tool, and one way that attackers use it is to fingerprint the destination operating system. They want to identify which operating system the destination is running and which particular version of that operating system, because then they can go ahead and look up the vulnerabilities specific to that version or that kernel version or that operating system version. So how do you do that? For this, you need elevated privileges. So we'll do sudo nmap, then -o, which is going to fingerprint the operating system. and localhost. And then Kelly. There you go. In addition to identifying once again the 1000 most common ports, it has correctly identified that this virtual machine is actually running, this Kali Linux is a Linux 2.6.x kernel. So not only it has identified the operating system, but the specific kernel version as well. Now this gives immense power to attackers because they can do a lot of research based on this specific version of the kernel for Linux, and then they can fine tune or launch more sophisticated attacks. Another interesting thing that you can do with Kali Linux is that you can identify what are the different computers or hosts or servers connected to your network. So this is sort of like a network wide sweep. So for this one, what you can do is that you first need to find out your actual IP address, your local IP address and your local network. So for that, you can do ifconfig, and the VM basically uses the Ethernet 0. So our IP address is 10.0.2.15 and our network mask is basically 24 bits. Now we once again need elevated privileges. So we'll do sudo nmap, and then we want to say do a sweep, a ping sweep, and then what is the IP address? The IP address is 10.0.2.15, and what is the network mask? So the first three octets, 8 plus 8 plus 8, 24 bits, okay? So it's going to do a scan of the local network, and it has identified 3 different systems which are accessible. Thank you.